What's up, guys? This is a 2010 Toyota Prius. It's 236,000 miles. I'm getting a engine misfire for cylinder 1 and EGR codes intermittently. I've been driving it like this forever. So anyway, guess I'm going to clean the EGR cooler again. And I'm also going to swap the coil pack from cylinder 1 to cylinder 2, see if that changes, because it's possible. It's very unlikely though. Toyota coil packs are very reliable. So anyway, pull the air box out, pull the cowling off, pull the windshield wipers off, pull the windshield wiper motor off. These are all 10mm bolts on the cowling. Everything's pretty much 10, 12, and 14. The windshield washer, the windshield wiper bolts are 14s. So now I'm just trying to disconnect some hoses. I take the throttle body off first. It's got a decent amount of stuff to disconnect. I'm going to drain the coolant down about as much as it'll let me drain. I think I got 6 quarts out. So with the cowling out of the way, I'm swapping the coil packs, and I also pulled the plug out of cylinder 1 just to see if there was anything going on with it. Looked perfect. They probably have 30 or 40,000 miles on Iridium plugs. Don't forget to give me a like for the YouTube algorithm. I appreciate it. So now I'm taking the throttle body out. Throttle body's all 10mm bolts. Most everything is 10mm bolts. A lot of the EGR cooler bolts are 12. There's one hidden bolt, the very underneath side on the EGR cooler. It's a real pain to get. A lot of people don't even put it back. Probably shouldn't, because it really needs to be cleaned probably every 50,000 miles. A good trick to put the bolt back is to use a shop rag in between the nut and the socket to hold it in so it doesn't fall out. So I'm just disconnecting some hoses, getting the throttle body out of the way. Now I did not disconnect the 2 hoses that go to the throttle body. You can just set it to the side. You don't have to worry about disconnecting those hoses or draining the coolant. So I pulled out the little sensor, used a little mass airflow sensor cleaner on, I guess it's a pressure density sensor or something like that. It's not a mass airflow sensor in the bottom of the throttle body. So I cleaned that and just cleaned out the oil in the bottom of it and just cleaned out the passages. Each intake runner has one little spot for the EGR flow, so the farthest one is usually the one that seems to clog up the most, I guess because it cools off the most before it gets there and it's the longest. I went ahead and cleaned the PCV valve underneath the intake. It was a 22mm, pretty big. It seemed to have a lot of Loctite on it. It took a while to back it out. I just cleaned it out with carburetor cleaner, make sure it rattled. I wasn't having any problems with it. Now I'm working on the studs in the back of the EGR cooler. These are just 2 Phillips screws, and pull the motor assembly part out of the EGR flapper door. Pull this stud out on the front of the EGR. There's a couple 12s. They're mostly 12s. You got to back the 12s off the stud, and then you can pull the stud out with an E8 inverted Torx bit. It's got 2 bigger hoses in the back to take off the EGR cooler that have coolant in them, and there's 2 in the front. I think the book recommends pinching the hoses, but I think it's easier just to drain it. And then once the air box is out of the way, you can open the petcock on the bottom. It took me about 2.5 or 3 hours to do the whole thing. EGR cooler. It's only been about 30,000 miles now. I'm marking the cooler because it can mount up a bunch of different ways, and you'll learn the hard way. It's really hard to figure out which way it goes back. You almost have to look at the video. But if you use like an awl or a punch, just scratch a few lines. That way it lines right back up. That's probably the best way, because the carb cleaner is going to wipe off the marker, because it did. So I'm just running through filling up the EGR valve here and just making sure that it moves freely. It's only been 30,000 miles, so it actually wasn't too bad. It's a big mess. I'm just filling up the cavity, sort of dissolving the carbon, pushing on the valve. Now I've got a can that's almost out of pressure, so I'm just basically dumping the carb cleaner down it. So I put 2 cans through it, and then I blasted it out with water. Then I blew it out with air. Then I put carb cleaner through it again, then blew it out with air again, so it wouldn't have any water residue. This is probably one of the longest parts. It could take 30 minutes or an hour. If yours has never been clean, you have 200,000 miles, it could take you hours to do this. It is a real pain. A lot of people recommend soaking overnight. I actually got my electric pressure washer, and then of course I forgot the wand, so I wasn't able to try that out, so I just used carb cleaner again. But I was starting to get a misfire right off idle, so I just went ahead and knocked it out. So now I got everything clean. I'm putting it all back in reverse order. The bottom hard to get bolt, I did not take that stud out. It was a 12 millimeter, and then it had a E8 Torx stud. I did not take the stud out, the very bottom one under the cooler. The 2 in the back, you have to take both studs out, and the one in the front, you have to take that stud out too. So I put everything back together and started it up before I put the cowl on, just in case there was a problem, which is probably what you should do too, because it takes about 10 minutes, 15 minutes if you're, moving quick. It's kind of a hassle. So I'm just putting all the hoses back on, putting all the electrical connectors back on. I took off quite a few electrical connectors. The little wire loom holders are kind of a pain. You got to pinch them from underneath. Some of them broke. I was able to get most of them though. Just putting the intake back on. I probably torqued it about 10 foot-pounds. Pretty light. Torque spec's probably between 8 and 10 foot-pounds, or 8 and 12 for most of these small 8 millimeter, 10 millimeter bolts. Studs, that is. Bolts are all 10, 12s, and 14s. Of course, the PCB was 22. If you do take the cover off the EGR valve, make sure that you spin the little magnet down before you put the cover back on. But I actually only had about half a gallon of Toyota Long Life fluid, so I had to reuse part of what I had. So I got a funnel and basically some shop towels and was pouring it through that. It was pretty clean anyway, but there was some specks of dirt. Just checking the air filter, sprayed the mass airflow sensor off. Make sure you use mass airflow sensor approved spray. Toyota Long Life. This part took a little while. It's pretty slow to go down the funnel with the rags in it. I started it up, run the heat wide open once I got this in there, and it warmed up. You can see I'm pulling the bleeder out right here. It's kind of like the highest part in the cooling system. I could never get coolant to come out of it. But the last 2 times I've done this, I didn't use it. I thought it would be nice to get all the air out quicker, but it seems like the system purges itself pretty good. I went with a bigger funnel here, try to make it go a little bit faster. But I let it run for probably 10 minutes. Started it up, it made a heck of a clatter, which a lot of these Toyotas make kind of a clatter when you first start them up, especially if they're getting any misfire at all. So I've got the cap off and the funnel in, and I just run it for a little while until it's got good heat coming out, and then I'll let it cool and just top it off. That's pretty much it. This is the same procedure you would use if you were going to change spark plugs or coil packs too. This whole cowling has to come out. Once the weather warms up, I'm got a S2000 I'm going to take out and do some videos, so y'all subscribe so you can see that. It definitely helps if you have some Milwaukee impact wrenches, it makes things go a lot faster. If you were using all hand tools, this would take a while. These are all 10mm bolts. Put the windshield wiper back in. 14mm on the 4 stud or the 3 studs. The one wiper has 2. This one has 2 14s, and this one has 1 14. I thought I moved them when I put them on, so I put them up a little higher. Thanks for watching. Give me a like if this helped you out.